Hello, everybody. Welcome to amazing, wonderful, fantastic review that I have for you all today. So, we're going to be going through 25 questions, and I want to just remind you a couple things as we're going to be putting out some new videos. We have a couple of websites that we have pushed before and we've mentioned. The first one is helpmefindabrokerage.com. If you go there, you'll be able to get my PDF on the top questions I would be asking a broker. If I were to be looking for a broker today, what are these top questions that I would be asking? And the next one, if you do have questions about math, I put together a really comprehensive math guide for you. It's all free. You go to mathwithstu.com and you also see some of my top math videos there. So if you need help with that, you could definitely go to those two sites. Now, I just want to go into these questions and get some detailed information about this and hopefully help you out. So let's take a look at this first question. It says, what defines personal property in real estate? A, any physical land and structures. B, intangible rights and interests. C, movable items not permanently affixed to the land. D, only the airspace above the land. So what say you? What say you on this one? So this one is going to be what defines personal property? So if we're talking about personal property, that's going to be any movable items that are not permanently affixed to the land. So sometimes intangible rights, and what do we mean by that? So sometimes you have a question on some of the other answers. So let me go through them and say why that's not personal property, why that's not the definition of personal property. So intangible rights and interests could be potentially considered real property. So intangible means that you can't touch it, you can't hold it in your hands. So what happens is this: intangible rights could be something like mineral rights. That would be something that we would consider part of the real estate ownership. That's part of the real estate. Also, any physical land and structures, well, that's going to definitely be considered real estate. And the airspace above the land, that is included with your ownership of real property. So when you own real property, you own the airspace above it, as well as the mineral rights or subsurface rights below it. So that's why if we're referring to the airspace above the land, that would be considered part of the real property. So let's look at the next one. What does fee simple absolute estate signify? Is that A, limited duration of property ownership? B, lease-based property ownership? C, complete ownership with the rights to use the property forever? Or D, shared ownership between married individuals? So what do you think on this one? And keep in mind, you could pause this. You could just take a listen, rewind, because that's what these are good for. These are good for really sitting down and getting a good, nice study session in where you just get, some of this stuff into your head and hopefully we get some stuff to stick. So this one's talking about fee simple absolute. Now, some of you might have seen fee simple absolute written as fee simple or fee absolute. Some authors change it up a little bit. But what fee simple absolute is, it's going to be the complete ownership with the rights to use the property forever. So as opposed to, let's talk about this for just 1 second. A freehold estate is going to be for an indefinite period of time, right? Or what I like to say is, I like to say freehold estates are ownership. Less than freehold estates are leases. Okay. So when we're talking about, is it a limited duration of property ownership? There is no limit to fee simple absolute. Is it a lease? No. So it's a situation where also too, do we know in fee simple absolute if it's ownership between married individuals? It could be, but that's not the definition of it, right? Definition of it is it's going to be the most complete ownership with the rights to use the property forever. So keep that in mind. Remember, you might see some answers that you're like, maybe it could be that. When you're taking the test, also when you're taking practice exams, it's a situation where you want to answer the best answer based on what they're giving you. So in this one, could you have a shared ownership between married individuals that is fee simple absolute? Yes. Sure, absolutely. My wife and I, we own our property fee simple absolute. But is fee simple absolute always going to be shared between married individuals? Is that the definition of fee simple absolute? No. The best answer for what the definition of fee simple absolute is it's going to be complete ownership with rights to use the property forever. Next question. Which type of deed provides the greatest protection to the buyer? Is that going to be a quitclaim deed, a warranty deed, a special warranty deed, or a trust deed? So what do you think on this one? We have a bunch of different deeds, and we're talking about the buyer in this one. Now, when we're talking about a deed that's going to transfer title ownership, right? When we're talking about what's going to be something that's going to transfer title, we're really talking about the difference between what the grantor is promising the grantee. Because remember, OR gives, EE receives. So in this one, the best answer is going to be a warranty deed. The grantor is basically saying this: I own the property and I will defend it against any claims. So any claims come up, I will defend it against anything. So let's go through the other ones, okay? Just so that we're sure we get a little well-rounded definition of each one of these so that we understand why it's not any of the other answers. So quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed is when the grantor is saying, I may or may not own the property, and I will not defend it against any claims. That's usually used amongst family members. That's usually going to be used amongst people that are going to be in a divorce situation. Okay, so that's going to be a quitclaim deed. Okay, a quitclaim deed is going to be where the grantor is saying, I may or may not own the property, and I will not defend it against any claims. So, as opposed to the fact that you would have basically a warranty deed being the most protective, okay, the most protective, but a quit claim deed is going to be the least protective in that situation. It's going to be the least protective in that situation. So now let's talk about a special warranty deed, okay? So the special warranty deed is this. It's where the grantor says, I have title to the property and I will only defend it against the time that I owned the property. So that's typically going to happen in most residential real estate sales. So if we're if we're going to be selling a property, it's a situation where a special warranty deed is probably going to be the most common deed type that you would receive as a buyer in that situation. And that's the one that you're typically going to be using in every transaction. And the last one here is actually one that doesn't transfer title rights because it's more akin to a mortgage. So when you see a trust deed, you want to think mortgage and not necessarily something that's actually transferring title, because a trust deed is what is used in our title theory states. So what happens is there are some states that are going to be what we would refer to as lien theory states, where a mortgage would be used. Okay, where basically what happens is someone's going to say, hey, you can come and take my property if I don't pay you back. But in some states, they use what's called a trust deed. So it's in lieu of a mortgage. And when I say in lieu of, that means in place of. Instead of using a mortgage, in title theory states, they're going to be using what is referred to as a trust deed, where basically a third party is going to hold title and they're going to basically babysit it until such time that the owner pays off the loan. So that's the situation here. And also, too, Comment down below in any of the videos. If you do have any questions, concerns, burning desires, I'm more than happy to clarify things for you. Also, you could always schedule a private tutoring session with me. You could take a screenshot of something and basically say, hey, I had a question on this. You were doing a video on this, and I don't understand this concept. I always tell you that if you want to do tutoring or you want to work with, and even if it's not me, the best way to work with an instructor one-on-one is to have specific questions as far as like, hey, this was something that I really wasn't understanding and I really wasn't getting. So can you help me with that? Because that's going to give us something that we could chew on and we could explain it to you. So like if you showed me this question and you said, hey, why is it warranty deed? I could explain that to you. And I could also answer the questions of what are the other things. So that being said, let's go on to question number 4. Question number 4 says, what is a life estate? Is that a property owned for the duration of a tenant's life? Property rented on a seasonal basis? A property that has been inherited? Or a property that lasts for multiple lifetimes? So what do you think on this one? Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. This is going to go back to something I said earlier. Remember when I said that freehold estates are ownership, right? Freehold estates are ownership and they don't have defined period of time, right? This is one of our freehold estates. It doesn't have a defined period of time because we don't know when the person's going to pass away. That would be creepy. So we don't know that. So it's for an indefinite period of time, but it is based on something. So a life estate is going to be based on the duration of the tenant's life. Why do we refer to it as a tenant? Because they're saying property owned. Well, just like when we're talking about tenants in common, joint tenants, things like that, we refer to tenancy as ownership interest, okay, in something, okay? So that's why we call, listen to this, think about this, you ready? Legally, we don't refer to the renter of a property as a tenant. We refer to them as a lessee. Makes sense, right? Because we already use tenant in a different manner, shape, or form. We use it to describe ownership. So when we're talking about legal words that we're using, what we refer to as legalese, okay? Why we use things like lis pendens and a lot of Latin words. Excuse me. It's because we're talking in a language that is called legalese. So that's the situation there. A life estate is property owned for the duration of the tenant's life. So the life tenant, they would refer to it as. So if I gave Joe a property and I said, hey, you have this for as long as you live, he has what's called a life estate. Now, what if I gave Joe a property and it was based on Maria's life? I said, Joe, you could live here as long as Maria is alive. Well, that would be called a life estate por otra vie, meaning it's based on the life of another. That's actually literally what por otra vie means. It means for another's life. That's literally it, if you wanted the direct translation. But let's talk about this one. So we discussed a lot about what a life estate is, right? And now we're talking about, is it property rented on a seasonal basis? Nay, because we already said this is a freehold estate. So it's a type of ownership, right? And it's property that has been inherited. No, that's not how we identify life estates. Okay. If something was inherited, you might own it fee simple absolute. It's a situation where we don't really know how you're taking title to the property, what kind of interest you're inheriting, but it's a situation where it's not how we identify a life estate. And a property that lasts for multiple lifetimes, well, it ain't that. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the next one, shall we? This one says the right of the government to take private property for public use is known as eminent domain, condemnation, escheat, or severance. Now you're probably tossing up between two. And I'm going to guess that you're tossing up between eminent domain and condemnation. So I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to kick it back to the question, and I'm going to say, read the question. This is so much so a pain point for a lot of my students, because what happens is this: they read the question and they answer what they think they're being asked, not what the question is asking. This is talking about the government right, the government power. Okay. So the governmental power is referred to as eminent domain. Now, they exercise their right of eminent domain by the process of condemnation. They'll condemn the property, and that's how they exercise their right of eminent domain. So it's really interesting, because eminent domain is the right exercised through condemnation. Okay, and remember the government rights, right? The government powers. Okay, what are they? We remember them with the acronym PEAT, right? Police power, eminent domain, escheat, and taxation, right? So condemnation is not a government right. It's how the right of eminent domain is exercised. That's the process that they go through. So what is escheat? Escheat is the government's right to take a property that has been abandoned. And what we say by abandoned is that we mean that someone has died without a will, with no heirs, no next of kin. And it's a situation where you're basically forcing the government's hand. So here's how another way that I remember this. You ready? Eminent domain is basically proactive. They're basically saying, hey, we want to take that. Escheat is, we really don't have a choice. We have to take the property. Like, there's no next of kin, no will, no nothing here. All right. And severance is just basically severing something from the real property. So, like, if there was a tree and I severed a limb from it, that would be severance. Or if there was a situation where there was a deck and I now removed the deck from the property and I turned it into lumber, that is severing it from the property. So, let's go ahead and look at the next one. What defines a freehold estate? What defines a freehold estate? Is that ownership of a property for an indeterminate length of time? A lease agreement on an apartment? A commercial property rented to businesses? Or none of the above? So we've talked a lot about, actually, in these last couple of questions about not life estate. Well, yes, life estates, but freehold estates more specifically as the broader topic, right? So what defines a freehold estate? Now, I've given you several different definitions of it, but the one that I've always said to you is that there is an indeterminate length of time. We don't know. It's an indefinite period of time, okay? Or, as this author is saying, it's indeterminate. So it's ownership for an indeterminate length of time. So you could argue with me. You could say, hey, well, when it's a life estate, it does have a defined period. It's based on that person's life. Again, we aren't knowledgeable, unfortunately, as to when someone is going to pass away. So it is still an indeterminate length of time. It's based on something, yes, but we don't know when that's going to happen. So it is an indeterminate and indefinite period of time. And a lease agreement on an apartment, nay, not going to be happening, because, again, that's going to be your leasehold estates, right? And it's not a commercial property rented to businesses, and it's not going to be none of the above, because A is a wonderful, fantastic answer for this one. So let's look at the next one. We're on number 7 already. This one says, which ownership type can be obtained by possession over a certain period of time as prescribed by state law? Is that adverse possession, constructive possession, progressive possession, or accretive possession? What say you? What do you think? And also, while you're watching this, go ahead and write down your answer, see what you get, and then pause it. I'll give you a couple seconds before I click on the next answer. And this one's going to be called adverse possession. So it's very similar to like an easement by prescription, but you're actually looking to get title to a property. And every state has a little different period of time that you would have to be using the property, different laws in regards to how the process would go. Do you need to know that kind of minutia? No. When you're studying for your exam, you want to realize and understand that what happens is this: you want a wider breadth of information and a shallower depth of knowledge. So don't go super deep into things. So if you're the type of person, if you're the type of student right now where you have flashcards and the flashcards have all these words on it, no, stop, nay, nay. I don't want a whole lot of words. I have a sign in my office over at the Jersey Shore that says, "Stupid people pass the test." Okay. Stupid people pass the test. Why? Because they don't put much into it. They also don't look at the other answers and say, hey, what is that? Hey, what is that? Now, here's the thing. When you're with me and we're sitting here and we're going through these, I could tell you what each one is, but all the other ones are made up. So the one that is there that is going to be the correct definition is going to be adverse possession. So let's go ahead and look at the next question. How is a tenancy by the entirety terminated? By selling the property, by court judgment, by death or divorce, or it cannot be terminated. So what do you think on this one? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, I've never heard of tenancy by the entirety. It is in many states. It's similar to joint tenancy. So that kind of gives you a little hint. Okay. But certain states recognize this as a way that you could take title to a property for married couples. So, you know how it will be terminated now that I kind of gave you a hint? It's by death or divorce. Yeah, so if you don't know this or this isn't something that you've seen in your state, don't sweat it because you might not have tenancy by the entirety as an option for you in your state. So tenancy by the entirety is going to be basically joint tenancy for married couples. So joint tenancy for married couples is basically what tenancy by the entirety is. Do you get any additional benefits? No. It's just you have the added requirement of having to be married. So if you divorce or one of the spouses passes away, then it is not going to be something that you will be able to continue to have tenancy by the entirety. So let's look at the next one. Next one says, what is the primary characteristic of condominium ownership? Is it shared ownership of the building, exclusive ownership of common areas, or individual ownership of units and shared interests in common areas, or is it leasehold interest in residential units? So what say you? What say you? What do you think on this one? So condominiums, you're going to realize that these usually people get confused with these with co-ops. So another thing I want to say about condominiums, okay? It's a type of ownership. You're probably thinking, when you think condominium, listen, I'm going to be a little clairvoyant. I'm going to spook you out a little bit. Ready? When you think condominium, what you probably think is this. Oh, it's an apartment style home where basically it's on one level and it's connected and you might have a common hallway or a common breezeway. And then there's like units that are above you and below you. And it's something that there's going to be units next to you. And it looks like what we would say an apartment might be, right? Air quotations. No, a condominium ownership is actually going to be individual ownership of units. And the units could look all different ways. So if now I told you, hey, a townhomes are typically condominium ownership. Again, condominium isn't a style of home or a style of unit. It is a type of ownership where basically individual owners or individual owner or owners have one unit, and then they all share in the common areas. That's where you have an HOA, and the HOA is going to maintain the common areas poorly or really good. Depends on what the situation is. So it's a situation where condominium ownership doesn't have exclusive ownership of common areas. No, it's all going to be shared. So like if there's a outdoor open area or a clubhouse or a community pool, community tennis courts, those are all going to be shared interest in those, what they would refer to as common areas. That is going to be the term for them. So, and I mentioned co-op. So, what is a co-op, Stu? What is a co-op? Well, that's where typically co-ops are buildings that are owned, and you would probably say that these are apartment style units, where what happens is each individual owner owns shares in a corporation that owns the building. So there's a building that owns the all the units, and then you own shares in that corporation. That corporation may be like 123 Main Street because that's the name of the bill. That's the address of the building. It might be 123 Main Street LLC. So based on how many shares you have in the company would dictate what you have as far as a proprietary lease to one unit. Now, let's look at the next one. What does the right of survivorship entail in property ownership? Is that the ability to rent the property to others? The transfer of property ownership interest upon the death of one owner to the surviving owners? C, mandatory sale of the property upon an owner's death? Or D, dividing the property into parts based on ownership shares? That's a tongue twister there. So what say you? Yeah, there's certain things that kind of get me, like that double. There was a lot of S's there. So this one is going to be, because think about this, like, when do we see the right of survivorship? So think to yourself right now, when do you see right of survivorship? What does that have to do with? If you said joint tenancy, hey now, you're 100% correct. Yeah, it has to do with joint tenancy. And what it means is this: the transfer of the property ownership interest upon the death of one owner to the surviving owners. Yeah, so watch this. Let's say 3 people owned it, because I know, here's the other thing too. I'm going to be clairvoyant again. I'm going to read your mind. You always say in joint tenancy, it's 2 people, and when one of them dies, the other one owns it by themselves in severalty. Okay, but it could be 3 people, it could be 4 people, it could be 7 people that own it as joint tenants. And when one of them dies, their ownership just dissolves into the remaining owner or owners. Okay, so that's basically what it would be. Okay, it's going to be the transfer of property ownership interest upon the death of one owner to the surviving owners. Let's look at the next one. What does severalty mean in the context of property ownership? I kind of gave you a little hint before, but let's see if you remember it. Ownership of property by several people as joint tenants. Ownership of property by one individual or corporation. A separation of ownership between 2 parties, or division of property into several new parcels. What say you? What say you in the chat? Leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think. Like, what do you think on this one? I want to see. So this one is going to be, when we own something in severalty, listen to what I'm going to tell you. It is not several, meaning multiple, right? I have several guitars. That means I have multiple guitars. True story. Severalty is severed interest. You own it by yourself, so it's one individual or corporation. So I have an LLC that does investments, and if that LLC owned one property, right, we would own it in severalty, even though there might be other individual owners, and there are. I have my business partners on certain things where I'm going to be sitting there with, several people that own the corporation. But if the only owner of the property is the corporation itself, Stu Crew Investing, then guess what? It's owned in severalty by Stu Crew Investing. Okay. So that's the situation there. Let's keep it moving. Let's keep it grooving. So we're on number 12. We're almost at halfway. Okay. So actually, this is kind of halfway in a question above that. So this says, what best defines a parcel of real property? Movable items and fixtures, only improvements such as buildings, a defined span of airspace, or D, a section of the Earth's surface extending downward to the center of the Earth and upward infinitely, including permanently attached natural and artificial structures. Man, that was a mouthful. So one of the best tips I always give students, if they're guessing, if they're guessing, okay, listen, the more you can narrow down and say, hey, that's not an answer, the better you're going to be. But if you're guessing, a good rule of thumb sometimes is this: the longer answer sometimes wins. It sometimes is really a good one to guess. And guess what? I kind of gave you a hint. It is the longest one here. A section of the Earth's surface extending downward to the center of the Earth and upward infinitely, including permanently attached natural and artificial structures. So basically, here's what happens. Technically, when you own real property, you own all the way to the center of the Earth, or going all the way up to infinitely, okay, or infinity and beyond. So does that mean that you could do anything you want? Like, I could put a sign on the front lawn of my little beach house and my little beach community that says, Stu, the most amazing, wonderful, fantastic real estate instructor lives here, and put lights on it and have it 75 feet high. Can I do that? No. Why? Because the government puts limitations on my properties. That's covered in police powers, right? Basically being able to control zoning and saying, hey, Stu, you can't put the billboard up on your front lawn, right? You can't do anything you want. But technically speaking, you do own upward to infinity, okay? And you do own down to the Earth's center. That's why people who own land, now, depending on where you are in the country, this might be something that you're like, oh, wow, yeah, totally know people who have had this happen. And then you might be like, nah, I've never seen that. That's why people could just start to excavate for oil and try to extract crude oil in certain parts of the country, like you go out into Western Pennsylvania, things like that. That's something that they do. They lease the mineral rights out to companies to see if they have any oil, if they strike oil, right? Beverly Hillbillies, right? So it's a situation where, again, that's why this answer is the answer. It's the best one for what a parcel of real estate is, right? You own the air rights, you own the subsurface, and you own anything that happens on it that you put on there legally, right? Except for that 75-foot billboard by my beach house. Harumph. So let's look at this one. It says a property owner who does not pay their property taxes could lose their home through eminent domain, tax foreclosure, adverse possession, or escheat. Technically, all of these are ways that you could actually lose ownership to your home. But there's one that is specific to this question. That would be, and this one's kind of like a gimme, it's a tax foreclosure, right? If you don't pay your taxes, you could lose your home through a tax foreclosure. Now, could you lose it in any of the other situations? Yeah, but other things would have to happen for the other ones, right? And we've kind of gone over each one of those. So let's keep it moving. Let's keep it grooving, shall we? This is number 14, and it says, what is a cloud on title in the real estate industry? So we're talking about, what is a cloud on title? It's a defect that may affect or impair the owner's title to the property. It's an unclear property boundary, overcast weather conditions during a property appraisal, or a temporary lien on a property during construction. What say you? So what is a cloud on title? So sometimes you might hear the terminology or the verbiage that the title is clouded, right? And there's certain things that they could do to remedy this cloud on the title. Okay. But what is it? What does it mean if something has a cloud on title? It means that there's some sort of defect that may affect or impair the owner's title to the property. So it's basically a defect on the title. Okay. Now, you're probably saying, so could you give me an example of a cloud on title? Sure. It could be if someone's, so a common cloud on title, I would say a common one is when there's a name change of some sort, like a legal name change. That could cloud the title. And easy ways to do that would be to sign over quitclaim deeds just to clarify and clearly define that the person who had the name change is the person that we have on the title, right? So that's a common one and easy to repair, right? Because that's common and it happens all the time. But until it's clarified, right? it's a situation where it's going to be considered a cloud on title. Like, let's say Mary Smith bought the property. Mary Smith no longer exists because she's now Mary Johnson. Well, we need to fix that, right? So that's the situation there. So let's go ahead. Let's take a peek at the next one. We're on number 15 now, and you guys are doing great. And like I said, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and I'm going to ask that just every once in a while, just to remind you, because that helps me out. I'm really going to have a push this upcoming year to hit that 100,000 mark. So I really, really, really would like your help in doing that. So share this with your friends. If you're in real estate school, share it with your classmates, because I'm always looking to help out. You have my 2 websites up there that have a lot of free stuff for you to peruse, take a look at, and I'm going to be sharing a lot more. So keep an eye peeled for that. So this one says, what does it mean for a property to be underwater? It is facing the risk of flooding. B, the mortgage balance exceeds the value of the property. C, the property has a swimming pool. Ooh. Or D, it is a property with water rights issues. So what say you? What say you on this one? So this is probably a term that I would say a lot of you haven't even seen. So in practice, you would probably see this more frequently. But what I love doing is I love sometimes throwing in some vocabulary words that, hey, look, listen, do you need to spend 30 minutes trying to figure out what this is? Like, is this something that you need to research and create 7 flashcards on? No. Is this something that you might see on the test in a sentence, in an answer set? Yeah, you might. And what it is this: it basically means that the mortgage balance exceeds the value of the property. So in 2009, 2008, there were a lot of properties that were underwater. I remember one of my attorneys that I did a lot of business with actually had his billboard at a home floating in the water at the Jersey Shore, because that was where I did a lot of my business. And it was a situation where it was, I still remember, I could literally draw it for you right now if I wanted to. Because again, a lot of people knew the term that was practicing in real estate, that, hey, the home was underwater. A lot of homeowners knew the term because a lot of the homes that were on the market were underwater. So that's what it means to be underwater. It basically means that what you owe on a mortgage balance exceeds the value of the property. So what they were doing was they were either foreclosing on a lot of the properties or short selling them, meaning they're selling them approved by the bank. The bank was okaying it because, I mean, there was just nothing else to do. They were okaying it, and they were saying, hey, you could sell this property for less than what you owe, and we'll accept that. So fun times. Let's take a look at this. Number 16. What is a deed restriction? Real simple one. Is it A, a county level restriction on a property transfer? B, a limitation imposed on the use of the property by the deed? C, a regulation limiting the color of houses in a neighborhood? Or D, a temporary halt on property sales? So what do you think on this one? So a lot of people, so I'm going to say one thing about deed restrictions, okay, that a lot of people might not even realize. Deed restrictions have to be lawful. They have to be lawful. Now, they're always going to stay on the deed. They're always going to be there. But what happens is this: it would be a situation where you would have to make sure that it's lawful. Because if it's not lawful any longer, then it can't be followed. It can't be followed. And prior to the Civil Rights Act, there was a lot of properties, especially in the South, that they would say that you can't sell to people of certain race. There's some areas where they were saying, hey, you can't sell to certain people of certain religion. And those are still on the properties because deed restrictions do not go away. However, right now they are not enforceable. You can't actually do that. So what is it? It is a limitation imposed on the use of the property by the deed. So, what are some limits? What are some limitations that can be placed on a deed that would be potentially lawful? I'll give you one that might be a little wonky, but is something that could be an example of one that would go on to the property. Now, you might think this. You might think, Stu, deed restrictions are going to affect the value of a property. Probably, possibly, potentially. You're correct in saying that. However, a private individual can put a deed restriction on a property. So let's say this one. You ready? Let's say my great grandfather built the house that I'm living in. Okay. And he was a New York Giants fan, a big New York Giants fan. And so, because of that, naturally, he was a big Philadelphia Eagles hater. Okay. He did not like the Philadelphia Eagles. So let's say that he said in his deed restriction, diehard Giants fan, you can never paint the house green. Is it silly? Sure. Is it legal? Sure. You could say, hey, you can't paint your house green. That's something you could do. Is it going to potentially affect the value of the home? Yeah, I guess people who would want a greenhouse and would be adamant about that would not buy the house. But again, that could be a deed restriction that could go on property. And remember, deed restrictions are placed on by individuals. It is their individual rights to control what happens to the home in the future, because the government has the right to put some sort of county level, city level restriction on it, right? A regulation to limiting the color of houses in a neighborhood. Yeah, that could happen. You go down to some places where there's a big push for preservation, historical preservation. One of the towns that comes to mind is Charleston, South Carolina. Okay, so if you go there, and hey, if you haven't gone there, I'm going to tell you it's a really fascinating place to go to because of their the extent to which they go through historical preservation. So Rainbow Row has houses that are in certain hues, certain colors, and it's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. They wouldn't be able to paint the houses gray or just a bland color. They actually have some real strict preservation rules in regards to colors, style, aesthetics in South Carolina. So yeah, they could regulate that, although that might not be super common. That is something they could definitely do. A temporary halt on property sales, you really can't restrict someone's ability to transfer or sell their property if they own it. So that's something that just wouldn't be done on a city, state, county level or through deed restriction. So that would be something that wouldn't be enforceable. So let's look at number 17. It says, which type of property ownership allows for each tenant to have potentially different share of the entire property? Is that tenants in common, joint tenancy, tenancy by the entirety, or several ownership? So what do you think on this one? What do you think is going to be the best one there? Is it going to be several ownership? So here's the thing. It's not going to be several ownership. It would actually be ownership in severalty, but that's not going to be it. It's going to be tenancy in common. So in tenancy in common, you could have someone own 50%. Someone owns 60%, someone owns 40%, right? Because there would be different shares of the entire property. And even though you're married, you could still actually take property as tenants in common. Me and Mrs. Stu, we have properties, we have investments that I have a larger portion of the share, where me and my business partners do, and she has a little itty bitty piece. She has a itty bitty piece of it. So that's something else there that is going to be something you could do. So even if you're a married couple, okay, in that example I'm giving you, yeah, basically you could have different shares of ownership in tenants in common. Joint tenancy and tenancy by the entirety. Remember I told you that those two are very similar. The only difference is tenancy by the entirety, if it's recognized in your state, is just tenancy, joint tenancy with the added requirement of you got to be married. Okay, there's no further benefits, right? There's no extra benefits, but you do get the benefit of right of survivorship, and you do have to meet the requirement of the unity of interest, right? Meaning that you all have to have the same shares of interest in the property. So that is the situation there. Tenancy in common is the only and the best answer in that one. This one says, number 18, How does zoning affect property ownership? A, it limits the number of pets allowed on a property. B, it regulates how a property may be used and what structures can be built. C, it defines how much property tax must be paid. Or D, it only affects commercial properties. So what do you think on this one? This is a really good one because these answers are really going to make you think. They're really going to make you think. Make you scratch your head a little bit and make it easy for you. So this one is going to be the best answer here is that it regulates how a property may be used and what structures can be built. So could it potentially limit the number of pets allowed on a property and actually outlaw certain pets? Yes, absolutely. Okay. But that would be covered in it regulates how the property may be used, right? Going back to my little beach house and saying, hey, Stu, we know you're an amazing, wonderful, fantastic real estate instructor, but you cannot construct a 75-foot billboard saying that on your beach house's front lawn, right? Because they're regulating how the property may be used and what type of structures can be built. Okay. I can't decide, hey, you know what? I think it'll be really super profitable if I build a 7-story skyscraper in my on my front lawn and I'm going to have 17 units here. The town could say, no. You can't build that type of property here. That is a type of structure that we would not allow, right? So that's the situation there. Zoning is going to regulate how the property may be used and what type of structures can be built. So let's look at the next one. What is an easement? I love this one. Is it the right to use public property for a limited purpose? The right of a property owner to extend their property? A right of way granted to a person or company authorizing access to the owner's land? Or a temporary suspension of property taxes? What say you on this one? So what is an easement? What is this? So there's a lot of different types of easements. I know that. But really an easement, if we had to define it, right? If we had to define it, it's going to be a right of way granted to a person or company authorizing them to access the owner's land. So what it is it's a permanent right to use someone else's land. Now, it's not necessarily going to be for them to cross over, okay? Because think about it, if you're talking about a utility company in an easement in gross, it's basically them having the right to access that property to get to their power lines, right? So let me give you a perfect story or an example of the utility companies kind of accessing, the property to maintain or take care of the electric lines. So I was at a movie with Mrs. Stu, and there was someone ringing our doorbell. Now, what you'll have to understand about our area, our town, no one rings my doorbell. That's just not something that happens. So the fact that was going off on our ring on the phone while we were in the movie theater, we were kind of like, you know what? Let me step outside and see who's ringing the doorbell. Lo and behold, my neighbor across the street decided to prune the trees on his yard, and he ended up cutting the power line to my property, and it was dangling live in the street. So what happened was the utility company had to come and maintain the power line that was attached to my home. And what they did was they gave me a courtesy, like we were talking on the phone. They gave me a courtesy that said, hey, we're doing this whether you're here or not. They're like, we're just giving you the courtesy of a doorbell ring and saying, hey, we're going up on your roof right now. And they had the right to do that because they had a right to use my property for the purposes of maintaining the power lines. So that's the situation there. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the next one. We're on number 20 right now. So this one says, when someone has the right to harvest crops on leased land, this is known as emblements, profits, hereditaments, or appurtenances. What say you? What say you in the chat? Type it in there. Give me a, because you know what? Here's what I'm going to tell you. It really does help us out when you chat with us, when you type things in. Okay, it's a situation where what happens is, YouTube basically says, hey, people like StewTube. That's why I always give like a couple shameless plugs on these longer videos of like, hey, do this. Also, too, I'm going to make a pro tip right now. We put ads on stuff. Why? Because my dogs are hungry. Uh, and because I do this, this is my full-time gig. This is what I do. And this is how I could make longer videos like this and have them be free to you. Get YouTube Premium. Like, just shameless plug, get YouTube Premium because for the $11-12 a month while you're studying, you won't have ads. You won't have them. You could be able to, go right through the stuff, and you're not going to have any annoying ads. And it still does support people like myself, Joe, and anyone else that you might be watching on YouTube that is either for studying or for your enjoyment. So you're not taking anything away from us. My dogs still get fed, and you get to take away a lot of the advertisements. So that's something I do recommend. I've used it myself for a long time. So what is this that we're talking about right here? When someone has a right to harvest crops on leased land, this is known as emblements. So notice that in this question, they actually say, hey, this is on leased land. Yeah, because if you're selling a property and it has crops on it, unless you work something out, the new owner is going to have the right to harvest the next harvest. But if you're a tenant farmer and your lease is either ending or something's happening where you are now no longer going to be the tenant on the property, that is a situation where you are going to have the right to harvest the crop, the next harvest. Okay. If you sowed the field, you've done this, you're going to have the right to the next harvest. You're not going to have the right to harvest in perpetuity, meaning like forever, right? So that's the situation there. Okay. So you're probably wondering, I know the word that you're probably thinking of. You're thinking, Stu, what is a hereditament? That's basically something that could be inherited. It could be tangible, it could be intangible, it could be real property, it could be personal property. So I could say that my Fender Geddy Lee jazz bass is a hereditament because that means that I could pass that on to my son. I could give that to him. Okay, that's a hereditament. Profits are profits. Appurtenances just mean things that run with the land. So we would say, hey, like, does an emblement run with the land? No, an emblement is the right to harvest crops. That right is retained by tenant farmers. Tenant farmers retain the right to harvest it. So no, it is not a pertinent. It doesn't go with the land. It goes with the individual tenant there. So let's look at the next one. A property owner transfers her property to her child but retains the right to live in the property until her death. What type of interest does the child have? Remember what the question's asking. It says, what type of interest does the child have? So think about this. Is that a life estate, a future interest, a remainder interest, or a vested interest? So remember, we're talking about what type of interest does the child have? Is it a life estate, a future interest, a remainder interest, or vested interest? So property owner transfers her property to her child, but retains the right to live on the property until her death. What type of interest does the child have? And this is really super confusing, okay? Because basically, she's giving herself a life estate, and what happens is they're saying, okay, it's going to go to the child after death. It is a remainder interest that they have because a property owner transfers a property to her child, right? But here's the thing. She's basically saying, hey, I'm going to live here as long as I die, until I die. And then when I die, you're going to have this. And you could do that. You could set that up without having a will. So basically, in this situation, if I had to infer what was happening, is she was setting it up so that her child got the property for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe there's another like siblings, step sibling, whatever the case may be, for whatever reason, there might not be a will, right? And they wanted to make sure that the child would get the property. So they're going to basically give themselves a life estate. And then it's a situation where the child actually has a remainder interest. Remainder interests are held by third parties. They're held by third parties so that what happens is when a life estate were to end, okay, then what happens is the remainder person would, the remainder man or the remainder person would be getting the interest. So what does the child have? They have a remainder interest. So sometimes questions like this, I will tell you, you're probably sitting there going, man, this was a head scratcher. And I thought of rewording this several times, but then I said, nah, I want you to scratch your head a little bit, because I'm going to give you a tip right now. When you're taking the test, I want you to skip as many questions as you want. Skip as many as you want. Stu says it's okay. Stu says it's okay. I'm giving you the green light. When I take tests for the first time, I usually skip about 50 to 60 questions. I skip about 50 to 60 questions because there's sometimes it's just like I read a question like this and I go, oh, we'll come back to you when I've had a little more coffee. So that's what you need to do in regards to something like that. You need to say, you know what? It's okay. I'll come back to this and I'll read it more carefully and I'll think, what are they asking me? So let's take a look at this one. This one says, what is chain of title? Is that a chronological order of conveyancing of a property from the original owner to the present owner? B, a series of linked property easements? C, a list of previous tenants in a rental property? Or D, a decorative feature in period homes? What say you? What say you in the chat? Type something in there. Tell me what you think this might be. So what is a chain of title? So this is going to be a chronological order of I'm going to change that word. I don't like that word, but that's what I have written down here, of conveying the property, of conveyances on the property. That's really what it should be. It should be conveyances of a property from the original owner to the present owner. Yeah, so it's a chronological order of all of the owners on a piece of property. Now, let me ask this, okay? What do you think a abstract of title is? Because people usually get these two confused. They usually say, I get chain of title and abstract of title confused. So what is an abstract of title? So what that is this. It's going to show you all the things affecting title to the property. So like liens, easements, things of that nature. So watch this. If you read the chain of title, you wouldn't know if there's any liens on the property, right? You would only know that it went from Bob to Joanne to Susan to Stu to Joe. That's all you would know. And you would be able to know if there was a break or if there was an issue with anything there as far as the title is concerned, which is important, but equally and not more or less important than the abstract of title, which is going to show you all the things affecting title to the property currently today, but it won't show you a list of all the owners. So that's why both of those are important, but important for different reasons, right? Okay. So let's look at the next one. We're on 23. This one says a developer retains a section of the property that permits him to pass through his neighbor's land. This is an example of a license, an encroachment, an easement appurtenant, or an easement in gross. So what say you? What say you on this one? So you have to think about, again, what the question's actually asking you, right? So it's saying a developer retains a section of a property that permits him to pass through the neighbor's land. So this is going to be an easement appurtenant, meaning an easement that's going to run with his land, right? So what happens is this, because the assumption here, if I'm thinking about this correctly, is that he is going to be developing several different pieces of property And they're talking about his neighbor. So listen to this. So why is it not an easement and gross? Because that's kind of the two that you would be kind of tossing up in your head if you were narrowing down to the right two that I think you should be narrowing it down to. So why is it not an easement and gross? An easement and gross doesn't have a dominant tenement. Okay, that's usually for utility companies. But if this person, so what is the words that make me believe that this is an easement appurtenant, and why is it an easement appurtenant? It's his neighbor's land. Dominant tenement is a neighboring adjacent property that is going to be benefiting. An easement in gross does not have a dominant tenement. So that's why an easement in gross actually doesn't run appurtenant, because the easements, when they are appurtenant, so an easement by prescription would typically be appurtenant. An easement by necessity, they run with the dominant tenement, the one benefiting, because an easement is a permanent right to use someone else's property for a certain reason. So in this situation, when they're saying, hey, he's going to retain a section of that property to permit him to go through his neighbor's land, that is an easement appurtenant. So, last two questions. Let's get into them. When a property owner dies without a will or lawful heirs, the property reverts back to the state. This process is called forfeiture, eminent domain, escheat, or intestacy reversion. What say you? What do you think on this one? So this one is going to be escheat. When a property owner dies without a will, without lawful heirs, okay, and it's going to go back to the state, that is escheat. Okay, plain and simple. That's it. So let's do our last one. What does PITI or pity stand for in the context of a mortgage? Is that payment, interest, tax, insurance, property, interest, tenancy, investment, principal, interest, tax, and insurance, or payment, income, term, and interest? Now, you're commonly going to see the abbreviation pity. It's just a common abbreviation. And it's when you are paying your lender, typically you are paying the principal, the interest, the tax, and insurance, also known as the pity payment. Okay, so pity, PITI, stands for principal interest. So that's the loan. But you're also going to be paying them taxes and insurance. Why? Because the bank is actually going to pay when they have a mortgage or a deed of trust. They're going to be paying the taxes and insurance. Why? Because they don't want you missing a payment. The house, crazy situation. The house burns down, and then you didn't pay the insurance, and now they don't have any insurance on the property. It's not insured, and they can't build it back. And now they have this asset that is no longer an asset. It's just kaputskis. That being said, I don't have anything else for you on this video. So please, I'm going to make the commitment to put more videos up here, have more things on the YouTube channel. Because again, I am going to be in a push for 100,000 subscribers. So please, if you've gotten to the end of this video, thank you. Go to my websites that I have up at the top. And also hit that like, hit subscribe, share this with your friends, share this with people who are taking the real estate exam. I'm going to be having more coming up. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great one. I will see you real soon.